Stasiland. Chapter 23, here we go. Hohenschönhausen. Let's give this one a go.
Chapter 23. Hohenschönhausen. Frau Paul and her husband were held at Hohenschönhausen prison for 5 months, and then, along with the 3 students, transported to Rostock on the Baltic Sea coast for trial. Frau Paul thinks this was because the Western media knew of the plight of Torsten on one side of the wall and of his parents on the other, and the authorities wanted to make sure there was no chance of publicity. The couple never saw the charges against them, nor the judgment. They were offered the services of Dr. Vogel, the lawyer with close government connections who became famous for negotiating the trade in people between East and West, but they mistrusted the arrangement and turned it down, insisting on their own family solicitor. He couldn't do much to help them, though, because he was handed the charges against his clients only 5 minutes before the trial began. The prosecutor alleged, Rodans Sigrid is accused of inducing or, at the least, aiding and abetting citizens of the German Democratic Republic to illegally leave the GDR. The accused maintains connections with members of a West Berlin people smuggling and terrorist organization which lures people out of the GDR and facilitates their illegal leaving of the GDR either with illegal papers or through the violation of the national border. She had custody of forged passports in her flat, organized meetings and conveyed information about planned people smuggling operations and accommodated persons to be smuggled in her flat. There exists the urgent suspicion that she herself will illegally leave the GDR. Frau Paul reads this to me and maintains at each point her innocence. We'd long since, as I told you, given up trying to get out, she says, and I did not know what the students were doing at our flat. In 1992, 29 years after the trial, Frau Paul saw in her file the judgment for the first time. There was no mention of Torsten. The judges wrote that her attitude of rejection towards our state had been exacerbated through the fact that the accused has been a constant listener to NATO smear radio. They put that in about the NATO smear radio because I would not let myself be misused as bait in their trap. Frau Paul and her husband were each given 4 years hard labour. She was put in a paddy wagon and taken from Rostock back to Hohenschönhausen to serve her time. Werner Koch got a lesser sentence, 1 year and 9 months in ordinary prison, because the penalties for being an accessory to the attempt to flee the country were greater than the crime of trying to flee itself. Hohenschönhausen prison is not far from the centre of East Berlin, but its existence was unknown even to people in neighbouring suburbs. Every street that leads in or out of the area around it was blocked off by a boom gate and a sentry. Hohenschönhausen was a prison for political prisoners. It was the innermost security installation in a secured area within a walled-off country. It was another blank on the map. Frau Paul took me there one day.
That's literally, it is a blank on the map, but it's also that synecdoche as well, the blank. It's a blank on the map, but that represents the withholding and redacting of information on a wider systemic level than just on the map. So it's a synecdoche for the way in which the Stasi operated.
It was an ordinarily cold day, and we were in an ordinarily grey residential street. As we walked along, she nodded and said, "That's where the boom gates were." All that remained was a hip-height bollard on the pavement. We passed it into what had been the secure Stasi zone. "That building there was Department M, postal surveillance," Frau Paul said, walking slightly ahead of me and pointing with an open hand. "That one over there was the forgery workshop for the Stasi. That one was a special Stasi hospital. These were plain concrete buildings. They looked empty. Those high-rises over there are Stasi housing," she continued. I followed her hand and saw a cluster of grey and white multi-storey towers. From one of them emerged a middle-aged man with a dachshund on a retractable lead. The man ignored us, but the dog eyed me warily as it pissed on the curb. Further...
Bodily fluids, anybody? Back to Funder's bathos, isn't it? Of back to the grim, back to the reality, and in this case, back to urine on the streets.
Inside the zone, we reached a building with high concrete walls topped by barbed wire. The walls seemed to stretch on and on, enclosing an area as big as a city block. At the corners were octagonal guard towers, and underneath them, along the outside, an empty dog run. Hohenschönhausen has been closed for several years. People are now fighting to preserve it as a museum of the regime. Frau Paul is involved with them, and she has a key. We approach the towering grey steel entry gates. There was a man-sized door next to them. Her eyes were clear. Her clothes made the rustle of nylon. She moved ahead of me in a businesslike way that said, "I hate this place, but I'm still here." We slipped into the empty prison, into a huge yard surrounded by buildings, with another squat building in the centre. The ground was asphalt and gravel, cracking like the top of a cake. A truck was parked in the yard. It was painted grey and had a solid steel cage on the back with no windows or apparent ventilation of any kind. "This is the same as the paddy wagon I was transported in for 5 hours from Rostock," she said. And then, to my surprise, she added, "Get in." I did. Inside, instead of 2 benches for the prisoners as I had expected, it had a tiny corridor and 6 internal cells, each with a lockable door. These were not big enough to stand upright in, and contained only a crossboard to sit on. She followed me into the truck. "Get in," she said again, pointing at the furthest tiny cell. "It'll give you a feel for what it was like." I climbed into one and she closed the heavy steel door. The key turned in the lock. I sat on the bench and everything was pitch black and horrible. Outside the door she said loudly, "You have to imagine that someone is sitting here with a machine gun." I imagined it. Then she let me out. Later I learned that these trucks were sometimes disguised as linen service vehicles, or refrigerated fish transports, or bakers' vans, when all the time they were ferrying prisoners and dissidents at gunpoint around the Republic. We walked across the yard to the building in the middle and entered it via a truck bay with giant doors. "This is where I was brought," she said. "I had no idea where I was. For all I knew, I could have been taken from Rostock to any place in the GDR. I certainly didn't know I was right in the heart of Berlin." The paddy wagon and the truck bay were designed so that the prisoners could be let out one at a time and never see each other, or daylight, or a street, or the entrance to the building. We walked up the steps. A huge studded metal door slid sideways to reveal a long linoleum corridor. Frau Paul pointed out a primitive cable and hook system that ran along the walls at head height. When a new prisoner was coming, it operated as an alarm system, turning on red lights at intervals. That was the signal for all other prisoners to be locked in their cells and guards to be out of sight. The prisoner was not to know who else was here or have any human contact which was not strictly monitored for psychological purposes by her captors. We walked along the corridor. Some of the cells were open, some shut. The only sound was our footfalls on the floor. Grey paint peeled off the walls. It was not the first time Frau Paul has been back, but I don't imagine this is easy for her. I know there are places that I don't visit, some even that I prefer not to drive past, where bad things have happened. But here she is in the place that broke her, and she is telling me about it. It is part bravery, like the bravery that made her refuse the Stasi deal, and it is part, perhaps, obsession, caused by what they did to her after that. She took me to the room where she was interrogated. In this complex, 120 rooms were available for simultaneous interrogations. Hers had brown patterned wallpaper reaching halfway up the walls, a dun-coloured linoleum floor, and a large desk and chair. Behind the door was a small 4-legged stool like a milking stool. 22 hours on that, Frau Paul said. Then we went to another building, the U-boat. From the ground it looked ordinary enough. We entered down some steps. Frau Paul was telling me it had been purpose-built by the Russians in 1946 as a series of torture chambers. I was sort of listening, but mainly I was adjusting to the strange smell. Some smells are hard to unravel. I remember the university library around exam time. It smelt of sweat and damp coats and bad breath. It was a mongrel.
The olfactory senses again back, and the triadic structure there of sweat and damp coats and bad breath. So it's typical of Thunder to pick up on the smell. And then this next line, it was a mongrel smell, a mixture, sort of a crossbreeding of different kinds of smells. So the interesting metaphor there of quite a base metaphor, something as mongrel is not really a flattering description.
Smell, but it was the smell of pure fear. This U-boat smelt of damp and old urine and vomit and earth. The smell of misery.
So really going for it with the smell here. So damp and old urine and vomit and earth, that polysyndeton there. And then the smell of misery, which is of course an abstract noun, and doesn't have a smell. So it's a metaphor as well. So it's a powerful phrase combining polysyndeton and a metaphor.
The tunnel corridor was long and stark. Single bulbs hung on cords. Frau Paul started opening doors. First, a compartment so small a person could only stand. It was designed to be filled with icy water up to the neck. There were 68 of these, she told me. Then there were concrete cells with nothing in them, where prisoners would be kept in the dark amid their own excrement. There was a cell lined entirely with padded black rubber. Frau Paul was held nearby. She remembers hearing the prisoner inside the rubber cell gradually lose his mind. At the end, the only words he had left were, "Never get out." Once, when he was taken away, she was ordered in to mop up his vomit and blood. The strangest cell contained a wooden yoke arrangement, something like an apparatus at a county fair. The prisoner would be nearly bent double, head and hands through the slots, and the yoke closed over them. In front of his head hung a metal bucket of water, like a nosebag. The floor and walls were black and lined with spiky ridges. Frau Paul explained that the prisoner would be barefoot, yoked into position. The ridges would bite into the soles of his feet. Then water dripped from a pipe hanging through the ceiling onto his head. Eventually the prisoner would be in such pain that he would lose consciousness, and his head would slump. It would hit the water in the bucket in front of him, and he would either revive into pain again or drown.
It's horrific, isn't it? Nothing particularly to say about it linguistically or structurally, but it's just absolutely horrific. And it's in here for shock. But also, this is what happened. This is the reality, and Frau Paul's narrative here is so important in revealing to us and to Funda the truth and the reality of what went on in those places.
There was nothing funny about this cell, and there was nothing funny about standing in it with Frau Paul, feeling the spiky floor through my boots and touching the coarse yoke and imagining being bent nearly double in the dark, in pain and drifting between consciousness and drowning. But there was something barnyard about it. It seemed too primitive for the mid-20th century, and too primitive for here. This contraption belonged further east and further back in time, some Python-esque sideshow of history. Though somehow there was something even more chilling about the office with the little stool Frau Paul was made to sit on, and the ordinary administrative desk and chair where the interrogator sat over her. It was in offices that the Stasi truly came into their own, as innovators, story-makers, and Faustian bargain hunters.
Now there's that reference to Faust writ large there, which we mentioned before. The triadic structure here: innovators, story makers, and Faustian bargain hunters. Making these deals with these poor people, and it really is chilling, isn't it? And it's just reading this and hearing what it must have been like, and walking through those corridors with them. It's very immersive as a chapter, not because of its figurative language, because actually there isn't very much, but because of its very literal language. So again, sometimes the absence of things can be really effective too, and here the absence of figurative language makes it more real, because of course it was.
That room was where a deal was offered and refused, and a soul buckled out of shape forever. Not one of the torturers at Hohenschönhausen has been brought to justice. 4 times a year, Frau Paul received permission to have a visitor, mostly her mother, but she'd be transported elsewhere for it, so that neither she nor her visitor would know where in the GDR she was being kept. Mail was sent to another Stasi address and brought to her opened. She'd been taken out of time and out of place. Torsten remained over the years at the West End Hospital. The nurses and doctors fed him through tubes and gave him medicine and changed his nappies. They sang him songs, they taught him to speak, and they tried to teach him to walk. The hospital was the only home, and its staff the only people Torsten Ruhrdans knew. This is one of the letters that got through to his parents. It was written in November 1963, when Torsten was nearly 3 years old. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ruhrdans, I learnt that you would like to be informed as to Torsten's health, which I can very well understand. Generally he is cheerful, making progress with his walking, and happy. He has become the darling of the ward. Of course, from time to time we still have difficulties to overcome, which means that, unfortunately, discharge from hospital is not possible in the foreseeable future. We cannot manage to feed him without a stomach tube, because as soon as he eats normally, he is in pain. His weight is still unsatisfactory, at 7,670 grams. His height is also significantly less than the norm for his age. His diarrhea has virtually ceased, though. There is nothing left for us but to continue as we have been, and in the hope that his stomach will gradually widen, and that the problems at the end of his diaphragm will mend. You can be assured that everything possible will continue to be done for your child. I will write again before Christmas. Yours sincerely, Professor Dr. L. Michael Hinze has always lived in the West. He was never kidnapped by the Stasi. He didn't even know that they were after him. And until recently, he had no idea that Frau Paul was in any way connected with his continuing freedom. I found out about it a couple of years ago, after the wall fell. For years I'd heard nothing from the Ruhrdanzers. Then they called me, he says. All this story with the blackmailing and the plans to kidnap me, I knew nothing about that at all. He is slightly uncomfortable with the whole idea. I mean, I always saw myself as small fry. I just put people together, got passports. I knew it was illegal under GDR law, but... He trails off. He didn't really think it through. Even if he had, how could he have imagined that someone else was being asked to pay a price for his liberty? She's a very courageous woman, Hinze continues. I have a great deal of respect for her. I'm also grateful to her, but at the same time I don't think I need to feel guilty. I don't feel guilty. I mean, I was just lucky that I didn't fall into the clutches of a Stasi. That way or by other means. He thinks that if they had really wanted him, they could have got him, and this is probably true. She was very active in the whole thing, Hinze says admiringly. The Ruhrdanzers used to marshal the people from Halle or Dresden or wherever who wanted to get out and help them. They were very committed people. Frau Paul has told me none of this, although it might be something another person would be proud of. The picture we make of ourselves, with all its congruences and fantastical edges, sustains us. Frau Paul does not picture herself as a hero or a dissident. She is a dental technician and a mother with a terrible family history. And she is a criminal. This seems to me the sorriest thing, that the picture she has of herself is one that the Stasi made for her.
And that minor sentence there, and she is a criminal, that non-standard use of grammar, is also bathos because she's described as being a dental technician and a mother with a terrible family history. That's a perfectly understandable and sympathetic way of presenting her. And then she is a criminal. It's a very blunt, surprising minor sentence to add to the end of that description. So it sort of has this bathos effect of undermining her personality. The same with the Stasi undermined her life and as it says, the story, the picture that she has of herself is one that the Stasi made for her.
I told her that her story moved me deeply, Hinze says, and that I don't know many people who would not have betrayed me. I said that there are not many people who have the courage she did, to behave with... He's looking for a way to describe it. With such great humanity, can I say. She behaved with such great humanity. We are both silent for a moment, but unfortunately, he says, at her cost. In August 1964, the Ruhrdanzers were bought free for 40,000 Western marks. But instead of being released into the West to be with their baby, they were dumped on the street in East Berlin with no papers. Frau Paul puts this down to their refusal of Dr. Vogel as lawyer. Of the estimated 34,000 people bought free between 1963 and 1989, there are, at this stage, only 9 documented cases of such cruelty, where the West paid hard currency and the East did not deliver the people whose freedom had been purchased. Torsten was still living in the West End Hospital. On the 9th of April 1965, when he was 4 years old, Frau Paul had news of him from Sister Gisela, one of the nurses. "We all wish you and your husband a very healthy and happy Easter. Torsten has painted you an Easter picture all by himself, brown Easter bunnies and a nest with colourful eggs. He said, 'That is for my mummy, she'll like that.' Yesterday we received your lovely card and we thank you on behalf of Torsten. He was so happy and we had to read it out to him straight away. He never lets it out of his little hands and keeps looking at the Sandman on it. My dear Mrs. Ruhrdanz, Torsten is really coming along now. It is such a shame that you can't be here to enjoy his progress. It could drive one to despair, this drama between parts of a single city. But I don't want to write about that. Better some more news of Torsten. He weighs 9,450 grams now and is 84 centimetres tall. He speaks and understands everything like a 6-year-old. He doesn't miss a trick. He told me I should write you that he's coming home soon to Kausdorf. Torsten can walk 5 meters by himself. Apart from that, he wheels around all afternoon about the station. Dear Mrs. Ruhrdanz, every best wish from us and 1,000 kisses from Torsten, for his daddy too." They waited another 8 months before Torsten was well enough to be released from the West End Hospital. When he came home to East Germany, he was nearly 5, small and bent and very polite. "Of course he didn't recognize me as his mother," Frau Paul says. "He didn't know what a mother was. He only..."
Just a brief point there. surprising reference of polite, small and bent, referring to his physical appearance, and the bathos there as that third thing being something about his personality. So sort of it's emphasised. It makes it more hard hitting because we've been set up with two physical descriptions, and then suddenly we get one that's more profound and perhaps a deeper description about his persona being polite. And it's quite hard hitting because it reminds us of how strange his upbringing has been so far.
He knew the sterile atmosphere of the hospital and the staff there, the doctors, the sisters, and the other personnel, even though they all dealt very lovingly with him, and they tried— she's crying now, hard— tried to create for him, in whatever ways they could, something like a family atmosphere. It just wasn't his home. He was frightened, and when I— she has to stop because she can't get the words out. And when I took him in my arms for the first time and held him to me, he must have thought, what does this old lady want with me? She says she is my mother, but what is that? A mother? He addressed us with the formal Sie. He would say, Mother, would you kindly be able to make me a sandwich? I'm hungry. Or, Father, would you mind lifting me onto the chair? I can't manage. And this terrible distance. They made our boy a stranger to us.
That deixis again there, D-E-I-X-I-S, the word they, referring, of course, to the Stasi, but dehumanising them as they is particularly poignant, I think, at this point.
She lowers her voice, and it was then I fought with myself the most. Did I decide right in the interrogation when I refused to be used as bait for a kidnapping? Or should I have come to my son? She is weeping and weeping. I am upset too. It's the small things that make you cry. The idea of nurses and doctors in West Berlin trying to tell a little boy what a family was, to prepare him for one. The idea that in justifying her decision of more than 30 years ago to me here today, there is no peace for Frau Paul. I am scrabbling for tissues which seem to exist only in various embarrassing degrees of decay in the bottom of my backpack. I don't even think about Torsten. The doorbell sounds, and Frau Paul gets up to answer it. She comes back into the room with a man whose age is hard to tell, but I know immediately it's him. When I stand up to shake hands, I tower over him, and his hand fits inside mine. His body is small and hunched, and his arms and legs seem crooked, spidery. His head seems small, too. He has bright, deep-set dark eyes and prominent cheekbones. He's wearing a jacket with a couple of badges on the lapel, casual, cool. "Pleased to meet you," Torsten says genially, and he sinks down lopsided into the couch next to me. He does not seem surprised to see his mother has been crying. Torsten is not sure whether he remembers meeting his parents for the first time. "I've seen the photos," he says, "and it's hard to distinguish what I remember from what I've since seen. I know from being told that I addressed them with the formal Sie because I didn't know what a parent was. Sometimes I have an inkling of the meeting, in the dark past, like a Fata Morgana, but not consciously so, no." His voice is very soft.
So a Fata Morgana there, just to save you looking that up, is it's like a mirage. Well, it is a mirage when you look into the distance and see what looks like water on the horizon, but it's actually not.
I want to know if he thinks his mother made the right decision not to come to him, so I ask him directly. He is relaxed. "I have never looked at my parents and thought they made the wrong decision," he says, "or looked at them like the Stasi did, as criminals or anything like that. Quite the opposite. I admire them for what they did." He seems to have learned to contain both longing and regret. "It doesn't occur to me," he says, "to think that perhaps they might have done things differently and things might have worked out differently. But then again," I offer, "I suppose one visit wouldn't have made much difference." I wasn't trying to take any of her heroism away. I was trying to find a way of thinking about her choice that wasn't such a drastic abandonment of him. But he gently cuts me off and thinks of it from his mother's point of view. "Well, yes," he says, "but if you think someone is dying, you probably want to see them just one more time before they do. That would make a difference to you, even if it doesn't change anything." Torsten supplements his invalid pension by working with bands in the electronic music scene. It is something he has done in one form or another since before the wall fell. Back then, because of his invalid status, he was permitted to travel to the West once a fortnight. He would be commissioned by rock musicians in the GDR to smuggle back spare parts for them. Torsten was well known to the border guards and was searched about 90% of the time, he says, smiling. "I was frequently caught, but luckily the consequences weren't so bad for me. They did accuse me, though, of dangerous trade with musical instruments and musical electronics, he laughs. Despite his family history, the Stasi went after Torsten to see if he would inform for them. First, they gathered compromising material on his smuggling. Then they brought him in for questioning. But Torsten went mum, so the same material that would have been used to pressure him into informing became instead evidence of his unsuitability for it. A final report of the 17th of June 1985 is 2 sentences long. R is not suited for an unofficial collaboration with the ministry. R participates in criminal activity. It was clearly not an option to write. R refuses on principle to collaborate. I ask Torsten whether he thinks of his life as having been shaped by the wall. I find it hard to tell exactly in what sense my life has been shaped by the wall, how it might have been different otherwise, he says, but that it has been, I have no doubt. He has learnt not to play the if-only game. If only there had been no wall, I might have not relapsed. I might have grown up with my parents. They might not have gone to prison. I might have had a healthy body, a job, a partner.
I do apologise for this weird crackling noise. I'm not quite sure what's causing it. If you can hear that, it's hopefully it'll sort itself out. The asyndetic list there, isn't it? A healthy body, a job, a partner, all the things that might have been, but he's learnt not to indulge himself in those sort of thoughts because it won't lead anywhere. So he's sort of controlled and repressed those ideas of what might have been.
He shifts in his seat to look at me straight on. There are no people who are whole, he says. Everyone has issues of their own to deal with. Mine might be a little harder, but the main thing is how one deals with them. And how do you? I am facing him, looking at his twisted body and listening to him breathe through the tubes they placed inside him. Well, it is an issue for me. I think life can end much too quickly, so I have no long-term aspirations. Whatever it is I want it now, to experience it today. I have no patience for saving money or building up some kind of enterprise. It makes me nervous. Other people say, "You have time, you're still relatively young," but I'm always so afraid that things can come to an end at any time. He pauses. Or that politically, too, it could all change again, and then I'd have no chance to experience certain things. I remark that for something so big that shaped their lives so brutally, it's hard now to find a trace of the wall. I'm about to say I think it's odd to let everyone forget so quickly when Torsten says, "I'm happy that it's gone, and I'm happy too that there's so little of it left to see. It would remind me that it could come back, that everything that's happened might be reversed." "But that wouldn't be possible," I laugh. He looks at me soberly. "But anything is possible," he says. "One can never say that something is not possible." His mother agrees. "Who would have thought that a wall could be built?" she says. "That was also impossible. And who would have thought that at the end that it might ever fall? That was also impossible." People here talk of the Mauer im Kopf, or the wall in the head. I thought this was just a shorthand way of referring to how Germans define themselves still as Easterners and Westerners, but I see now a more literal meaning. The wall and what it stood for do still exist. The wall persists in Stasi men's minds as something they hope might one day come again, and in their victims' minds too, as a terrifying possibility. Torsten offers to give me a lift to the station. Frau Paul kisses him and takes my hand with both of hers. Then she shrugs her shoulders. "That's it," she says, as though when she added up the parts of her life, it was a smallish thing. Torsten's car is an old-style BMW, with a high seat custom-built behind the steering wheel. He puts on some music with a Latin beat, and it keeps strange, syncopated time with the windscreen wipers. We chat, and he takes me past the station, nearly all the way to Alexanderplatz. Then he lets me out with a wave and drives on, crooked and crippled, and living for the day.
So what a really poignant and tragic story and anecdote, Frau Paul's story and Torsten's upbringing. It's really, really moving, isn't it? And to finish off there with the description of him there as crooked and crippled, and there's something about the consonants there of the crooked and crippled, as well as being quite a harsh phrase to use. And I think even when the book was written, I think crippled is a harsh phrase to use. I say now certainly it's more harsh now to say, but I think even then it would have been harsh. And my bread's ready. I'm just making it. Must have proved. Right. So crooked and crippled and living for the day. Again, using two appearances. The first two being appearances. The last one being something more profound. Living for the day. That's more powerful. So it's incrementum in that case, not necessarily bathos. In fact, it's not bathos. It's the opposite. It's something more profound. Living for the day. He's seizing the moment. He's, carpe diem. He's trying to live for the moment and enjoy himself and forget about his past, which has been so horrendous because of the Stasi and because of the wall. So we'll leave it there for that one, and I'll try and sort out this crackling. I'm not quite sure what's causing it. And then I'll see you again, or you'll hear me again in chapter 24.